Mm. And I welcome you in the name of Konzeptwerk Neue Ökonomie. We are a nonprofit organization based in Leipzig, and we basically work on this connection between global climate justice and the economy and the economic system. And we offer educational material, we offer workshops, we organize together with other organizations, big public events, we do publications. If you're interested in our work, you can have a look at our website. Anke will post the link to our website in the chat. And this event today is part of our Growing Together project. And in this project, several other events will also take place, and you're cordially invited to join. Anke will also send you the link to this series of events in the chat. The next will take place at the end of August. And also important to say, this event is funded by Engagement Global with funds of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and by the Catholic Fund. And yeah, with this event today, I will stop sharing because then we will soon move on to Tonny. With this event today, we would like to explore together what it takes to decolonize the economy. This is a very big question, and we do not expect to find the easy answers today, as actually it might seem that answers shouldn't be too complicated. It could actually seem as easy as respect the people, respect the nature. That's it. But then things like power relations, established dependencies, economic dogmas, and so on stand in the way. So then how do we deal with that? Like theoretically, practically, emotionally. And this is what we'll actually deal with today. This is the topic of this session today that you've come to join. Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy to have you with us, Tonny Nowshin. Welcome. In the first part of the session, you will share some thoughts and insights with us on colonial continuities in the economic system and on ideas concerning ways out of this. And then after a short break, in a second part, we will exchange ideas and paths and starting points for decolonizing economic structures and mindsets in breakout sessions. And after that, we will get back together and share our questions, ideas, thoughts, and discuss them again with you, Tonny. So it's not only presentation in the next 2 hours, but it's also like getting together and talking about also what has this to do with your work, with your approaches, with your own target groups maybe that you work with. And some of you might also be active in the field of education. This would also be a question, like what role does education actually play in decolonizing economy and economic mindsets? Yeah, so I would say let's welcome all of our different backgrounds. Let's welcome our different ways of learning, our different levels of experience with this topic, and let's embrace complexity. Yeah, and with this, I would hand over to you, Tonny. You ready?
Yes, hi, thank you, Nadine.
Just for, I wanted to say a few words on you. I forgot. I'm sorry. I would still do that. Tonny, 1 second. Well, you are, among many other things, an economist, a climate justice and degrowth activist. For me personally, you're also a very inspiring, warm-hearted and wise person. You have roots in Bangladesh and in social movements in Bangladesh, and you have also accompanied the work of us, of Konzeptwerk Neue Ökonomie, in a way for many, many years. Thank you for that. And in your work and in your activism, you focus on centering the concept of climate justice by putting forward anti-racist and decolonial perspectives and networks. And this is what also will be sort of in the center of your talk today. Yeah, that's it. Now I hand over to you. Thank you. If you want to add anything, feel free.
No, thank you. I think it's great that you're organizing this space together. I thank everybody for showing up, and especially online. I think after COVID, everybody thought we would not join any one single more online events and then just try to be outside. And especially it's also summer, considering it's a nice weather today in Berlin. So I really appreciate all of you taking the time, showing up here today. Yeah, and then for your attention for the next couple of hours that we're going to be together. As you remember, I will start by showing my screen. And yeah, let me check. 1 second. How best to do this?
Maybe one more information before we, as long as you are on your way. If you want to like take any notes, feel free. We're not going to send the slides afterwards.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, wonderful.
We still might go to a full screen presentation.
Interestingly, I cannot enable my speaker's view while I do this, but then you see the speaker's view, right? It doesn't show you just the screen.
Now we see actually only half of your slide.
Okay. Yeah, this is one thing with Zoom. Also in the past, we had an issue. All right, we'll just do.
Yeah, like the way we tried before, it worked out.
Okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, welcome everybody.
Yeah, now we see the full screen.
The full screen, right? Yeah, okay. So many of you maybe remembers there were some questions that we wanted to discuss, like guide our talk today. And I think probably, so sometimes I don't remember because this is a topic that maybe like Nadine, we have talked about or have been working with for quite some years. So sometimes I think, oh, this is something that's already old and probably it's something everybody has navigated for some time, but sometimes maybe it's also so like I struggle sometimes to orient myself how where do we start when we are approaching such a topic, which on the one hand looks very broad and big, but sometimes could also feel like, oh, yeah, this is probably something everybody knows. So just to orient ourselves or guide us through this topic that can be quite complex at times, we have some guiding questions, and I would try to navigate this following that. But just it's always a good idea to start at the beginning when we are starting something, to talk about something. And what do I mean by start at the beginning? Our talk title is like what it takes to create a decolonial economy. Then we want to start why do we even want to talk about a decolonial economy, right? So yeah, I thought that's a good place to start. Why do we care? Why should we even talk about a decolonial economy? And to begin with, maybe something that's much closer, because decolonization or decolonial itself could feel like a few steps far behind, and there are many different approaches. Some might even say that the decolonization has taken place already, and the last official or the formal colony was back in the 70s that already ended. So why are we still talking about it after 55 years? And maybe a closer element that we can start from, so we can start trying by going backwards, like why, how is even decolonial relevant for us? Today, the world we live in, and that impacts all of us, unless one of you is a secret billionaire that I don't know of or Concept doesn't know of, we are all impacted, and we fall. I don't think none of us falls into the biggest group, which you can see if you look into this pie chart. This is from already 3-year-old report that was moderated by some top economists, including Piketty and a few others. But what basically they tried to gather from different data sources is how is the wealth of the world, today's world, distributed? And what they found is the top 1% of the world's population, or the richest 1%, owns 38% of all the wealth. And then the next 9% owns another 38, which means together the top 10% owns 76% of all the wealth of the world. And then the bottom 50% owns only 2% of the wealth, and the middle 40% owns 22%. And according to this, maybe, probably most of us would fall in the middle 40, or even at least maybe towards the bottom of the 10%. Maybe some of us have inheritance and could easily slip into that at the bottom of the top 10%. But generally that means that facing this inequality, and again, then how does that inequality affect us? Maybe it might be clear to some of us very right away, and to us maybe not so much, but I think quite a lot of the problem that we see in today's world is directly connected to the inequality. And if we can hold space or systematically approach this question, we would see a lot of the crisis is also actually breeding from this inequality. And this inequality itself has a long root. This inequality didn't come in one day, and later, at some part of the presentation, I would also try to go into this myth of that the smart people can make a lot of money, or the billionaires, even the tech bros, that they made it because they came up with certain amazing innovation, and that led to their wealth. But generally, and that is very recent, right? All the technological advancement and what we have seen, the fourth wave in terms of industrial evolution, if you want to say it, that's much recent, for maybe last 20-25 years. But even until the recent, even 100 years ago, what was the source of a lot of this wealth, and how the global wealth was produced? It's through a specific process of extraction, and that also heavily, most of it, through colonization. So then we can see if it's not even too far, even if you go just a little bit back, we see there is this wealth generation is heavily connected with colonization. So the world order, there is a hierarchy, and the historical colonial exploitation, if we go and look back, there were certain processes, and of course, there were, we all know, mineral accumulation. We needed to, like when the Industrial Revolution started, and through that we needed a lot of material elements to produce, and for the production, mineral itself was an important element in it. But then there was also this huge amount of labor that was needed from the plantation in North America that enabled for sugar production, and which sugar was then sold to Europe from a lot of the other whole labor that was used to build what we call today's grand civilization, that was enabled through slave trade. And then the share of those slave traders were also sold and operated in the stock markets in Europe. So there were different, it's not only exactly the people who brutally captured or were directly involved with the whole slave trade. There were, again, even back at that time, there were second, third level tiers, how people benefited from those slave trade. Just as today, even people don't have to be directly involved with the arms company Rheinmetall. you could also own shares of Rheinmetall, and there is one of the highest stock price is the arms industry at the moment. So there are different ways to benefit, and that was true even back then. And then it continued. There were competition and dominance over domestic markets. These are, so I'm just going over quickly like a review of this, but a lot of this we know the early stages. For example, when the British went to India and this beginning of colonization, one of the things they did, they tried to destroy the local producers and push their own good. And at that time, now today's this new liberal time, you would hear a lot about the quality of the product, and whichever product has good quality would compete in the market and sustain. But back then, this is not at all what they did. There was even a lot of brutal force. The quality of textile that was produced in India, produced in the in the UK, was not in any way superior to the ones that were being produced locally in the continent, the Indian subcontinent. But there was a lot of brutal force used to make people buy the cloth that was being produced in the textile companies in the UK. There were, over time, that changed faces, and we started seeing, and we would also see a lot of these companies who used to back in the days, the British East India Company then evolved and changed and became and merged into different corporate entities. If you dig through, you can find this Unilever has direct connection, is a direct kind of descendant of the East India Company. So it's similar in a lot of corporate structures, and the money comes from those structures. Through the trade, even through trade, there is this process, shifted terms of trade, that a few South American economists back in the day, already in the 60s, they defined the process, which showed when a country is already has progressed in the way they produce, they organize their production. For example, if a country is already producing more manufacturing good, which needs more intensive internalization of capital and labor, and when they engage with a country, for example, a smartphone. So if a country that is producing smartphone and they engage with trade with a country that is producing more first degree, like agricultural products, like bananas, through every round of trade, the country that is producing banana is going to lose out, and they would have to provide more and more bananas in exchange of the same amount of smartphone. So this is some examples, but this shows how over time trade, which was supposed to, or which is said that it benefits a poorer country, but in reality, it doesn't. And back then, when Singer Prebisch came up with this theory, they didn't have exact way to show with data, but recently, UNCTAD, with all the data, it has been now even proven, and through the data, we are able to see how this shifted terms of trade works. And then we know there is capital can move, but humans can't. So big institutions, the global institutions like World Bank, IMF, they're always advocating for how the smaller countries need to open up their capital markets so international money could easily go in and out, while the people are not allowed to move across borders. So that it's only the goods, services, and money that should be able to move. And again, there you would see it's always money from certain parts of the world can move much easily than money from other parts. And all of this is very strongly connected to this carbon CO2 emission-based economy. This is also connected because where we are now, we are seeing the climate crisis, and climate crisis is also, again, a direct manifestation of this whole production system and how this has been going on over more than 300 years. So in summary, what we can say that inequality, it's deeply rooted in a colonial history of capitalist exploitation, and behind what we see today, there's like hundreds and years of oppression of people, killing, and genocides that has taken place. Many of us already know the stories of King Leopold and then cutting hands in Congo, and those are some of the stories, and we think those are the things of the past. But in many ways, these are very present and ongoing in different forms. These are some examples that I used from a recent report that Oxfam published. It's called Takers, Not Makers, and there they try to show how, if you remember the pie chart I showed at the very beginning of this presentation, how there's 1% of the world owns so much, and actually Oxfam is saying, so the data I showed you was from 2022, and the most updated data that the Oxfam shows in this report, they say that it's not even 38% anymore, it has grown even more. So top 1% actually owns, I think the Oxfam's data now is more like 50% even. So collectively, it's way more. They all own more than rest of the world almost. So this is just to show how the fast and another interesting thing is it's not only the inequality is there, but inequality is rising, and it's rising also even at a faster pace. So we are looking to get more trillionaires, and that means while the people at the bottom are staying poor and even experiencing worse quality of life. This I thought is interesting because this makes it even more tangible, because I think the term billionaire, sometimes it's difficult to even grasp how big, how much money are we even talking about. For this, I think the third point on this, I found very interesting, that if any of the richest 10 billionaire lost 99, even if they lost 99% of their wealth, they would still be a billionaire. This is just in a contrast, like how much wealth that has been amassed and how concentrated it is. And the first and the second is basically to show the dynamics. So how fast this money, if any of us, we were trying to save $1,000 a day 315,000 years ago, even then we would not have as much money as the richest 10 billionaires, to again give a comparison for us to grasp. Yeah, and then that's just like, yeah, each of them has been getting almost every day. The richest people, billionaires, have been amassing 100 million a day. So, and these are some quotes from the report where I would suggest everybody to check the report out. It's a really good analysis, and they go through again. They also tackle quite a bit exactly what we're talking about today, how to like how the whole this conversation of colonialism is connected, and how we can even consider decolonizing our economy. But yeah, I will share two quotes, but this one I thought very interesting, where they're talking about the billionaires are rich because of cronyism. I was like, okay, what does this mean? What is cronyism? But basically, then they unpack a bit. Cronyism is the commandeering of state power to protect and expand their wealth, and some of it is illegal, but most of it is actually legal. It's supported by even certain legal boundaries and constitution. So much of it operates within legal boundaries, and often because laws, of course. And what's more interesting, that then the rich has the power to shape laws. So kind of the law is made a way that it protects them. And this exists when rich elites use their personal influence to capture the power of the state for their own private gain. Government officials and business people collude to rig the rules for their mutual benefit and at the expense of consumers, taxpayers, and other businesses. The second part is softer forms of cronyism include lobbying, funding political campaigns, and creating revolving doors between the private sector and civil service. Cronyism also involves the politicization of the civil service and the media, and the private funding of research and media to sway the political agenda. Family and friendship ties among elites further strengthen their influence. We calculate that, we meaning Oxfam, the report, that 6% of the world's billionaire wealth is from crony sources. So basically what we are seeing is how much money is concentrated, and then how that money is kind of also supported. So there's like a cycle, there's this loop of money and using that money to concentrate power, to corrupt, and in this way not even corrupt, like kind of bend the rules, create a system that reinforces the power, the centralization of power, and then it goes into making more money, and that covers certain, of course, layers in society and system. And here, this is because I'm deeply rooted, or this whole climate justice is an important issue to me. And I think the discussion of, again, decolonizing economy is also closely connected to fighting climate crisis. This is a report, another report that came out in 2021, but this is a good, I think, is visualization of how if you see the rich, like the wealth, how much wealth is centralized, but then also then you see the emission of CO2, how this is also connected to the hierarchy of richness or the wealth. And this shows kind of the top 10% is responsible for more than 50% of the global CO2 emission. And I believe maybe in this 4 years, this is from 2021, so in this 4 years, maybe it has even, and this, okay, and the data actually looks until 2015. So this probably, I would imagine this divide is even broader now. And then there are the bottom, and then the bottom 50% is responsible for only 7%. So here you would also see, if you think about a lot of the discussion we hear about climate and how oftentimes you would hear rhetorics like, oh, it's the population that's the problem. Of course, we are too much, so the world is collapsing. But if you look at the dynamics of climate crisis and look at the CO2 emission, then we realize that no, actually, if we were leaving like the poorest 50% of the world, all of us, then we would still be well within planetary boundaries, and we can manage. So there would be other elements of it that gets how the story is told. And I tend to think then what we just saw before, like how the stories, how media houses are part of this whole cronyism, then definitely how the stories get told and how narratives are shaped and written plays an important role, who has money and who gets to get rid of their responsibility, at least in front of everybody. So I think the takeaway from here is the rich are using their powers to undermine collective efforts, and that also includes any form of course, social reform. And you would hear every time there is a strong demand or a movement coming around, oh, let's tax the rich, let's reform, let's go towards this 1%. And soon after that, and I think in the history we can dig out again and again, then there's always this a right-wing surge. There's always the villain, always the most vulnerable starts becoming the villain in the public media and the attention. It's always the immigrants and the people who look a bit different and the people who has the least power. Then suddenly they become the main villain who's taking away the job. So, and then there's wedging people against people, and these patterns you would see time and again. Social inequality and the demands to hold the powerful accountable, and then this whole move and shift towards where people starts dividing around identity or certain ethnicity or certain elements that divides this whole kind of unifying, holding the powerful into accountable. And we can also see, and there are again cases and elements coming out, like how lobbying power, how Exxon again and again uses so much lobbying to stop any kind of climate reforms coming into place, any kind of effective action being taken. So this is one of the thing I think we need to hold in our mind when we're holding the whole discussion of decolonization and how we can move forward, that it's very much about power. So decolonization is not disconnected from any of the power discussion, any of the class discussion, and the other identity discussions. So to be decolonial is to be class aware, to be informed by the history, to be aware of the race, and to forge the way forward for a solution out of this distraction that we are facing today. And this is kind of the underpin I want us to remember when we're starting, kind of getting into tackling this question. So then based on that, if you want to then getting into the discussion of what, so I think we try to answer like why care about decolonizing the economy, and what I wanted to establish is that is kind of the way forward. That is, we have to be rooted in that to find solution. It's very connected to what we're facing today, and this is a compass that can help us cut through all the noises, all the chaos, and a lot of the distraction. But then, and then if you want to center, so if this is the solution, what can be the core of a decolonial economy? And then I think it's good to have a set of discuss like core values that could help us to center ourselves for a decolonial economy. And this is again taken from the movements, the people who are working there, a lot of collective effort that's going around all over the world to create the decolonial economy in different way to kind of decolonize the system and the structure. So it's very deeply connected. We cannot decolonize an economy without talking about the system and without talking about strongly changing, radically restructuring the system. But as you can see that how these are all very connected. So the core values, one is land as a living being and not a private property. So how we deal with land, how we connect with land is very different and has to be very different in a decolonial economy than it is today. Today, land is looked as a mere space, like a source of production, space of production to be grabbed to as a whole area of extraction. And all over the world, we would see that, again, if you go back, this indigenous people being dispelled from their land, people needing to, the dispute all over like on land and how that connects struggles. So this has been a very important issue for a long time, but then this also calls for how we change and connect with the land. Like we have to completely rethink our relationship to land for a decolonial economy. The same for planet. We at the moment we think of planet as a just a provider source where we can just go and get things. Wood in the forest itself doesn't mean anything in today's economic theory. A tree in a forest is nothing. It doesn't account anything to GDP. It only increases the GDP when you cut down that tree and make it into a chair or a table when you bring it to market. And there is no way to account, to value that forest. And it's same, a soil itself doesn't have any value, no matter how crucial it can be, no matter how crucial it is for the whole stabilization of the life, unless we are making something out of that soil and making it a product. So for a decolonial economy, we would have to also move and shift that to look and learn and connect, look at planet as a connecting whole and not just ground of extraction. Similarly, as humans, our individual responsibility, the way we think of entrepreneurship, ownership of assets, private ownership, that's kind of more centering on the communal stewardship and our role in there. Centering on solidarity and mutual aid over competition, because in this regular mainstream neoliberal economics, of course, competition is very core, and you would see competition is always good. As soon as you introduce competition, we get better products, we get better services, the management improves, and it does not take into account the other impacts of competition. And even if you move away, if you go through the amount of harm competition does to the rest is never taken into account. It's only focuses on one winner, or through that process, what other innovation comes out, but never the harming that also takes place. And it necessarily doesn't have to be that way at all. And this we could, when we center and when we ground in the right values, we can create the enabling environment. So this is the other element, and in summary, kind of life over profit, care over productivity, and healing over racing. If that's what we want to center our decolonial economy, and how do we know? So these are some of the core values, but this we also see in the fights, in the global struggles that's happening all over the world, and we can learn from this fight. So there's the Zapatista autonomy, and most of you know all of this. So in the Latin America, we know about the Buen Vivir. In Africa, there is Pan-African movements, but also this Ubuntu philosophy that many communities practice. There's the land reform movement in South Africa. In Asia, there has been all over the anti-extraction resistance and also anti-dam, like a big dam projects, which doesn't take into account the land rights, again, the indigenous people living there, but also just how the ecology and the need of the non-human entities in a land. And then there's the Adivasi land defense rights. There's the Palestine liberation, as you all know, so the ongoing war and the struggle that's happening. And this is one of the things I think in real time, if we read about the whole colonization in North America, in other parts of the world, and we hear about the brutal way that this took place, and we think, oh, how was that possible? And I think this is one case that's unfolding in the current time, in the modern days, very clearly live streamed, that we are witnessing. And yeah, you can see how that is possible. Indigenous North America, there are water protectors, land back, food sovereignty fights. There's anti-fossil fuel extraction. There is a huge labor movement also. There is Black-led community building and kind of whole political reform movement that's also happening. These are not part of it. And then there is diaspora-led cooperative movements in the US and UK, as I named. This doesn't include also there is degrowth and other struggles that are taking place in global north. And this is not an extractive list. If any of you can think of other struggles that you think should be in this list, like, yeah, feel free to drop those in the chat. And also just later we would also hold space to hear what other fights you think should be part of it. Here, just one example of this land liberation and colonial. We have this this is also like the more recent times that we would think from 47 to present, how the land is changed and how this whole identity, like this whole colonization process happening, and that placed out, and it's kind of like a continuation. And soon this would also be kind of very different, as we can all expect to see. From there, so this is one proposal, a framework that me and one of my dear friend and colleague, we wrote together an article kind of as a thought experiment, but also what we want to do. There are all these alternatives, and as a convergence of alternatives, how we can imagine world making after growth. So kind of growth, what we name is like the whole neoliberal economy and this whole colonization that has taken place. And as a process of that, to decolonize, this would include, of course, decolonization, and after growth, how we can move, taking the whole reality, our climate crisis and all of that into account. We have wrote down kind of 6 policy sets. You can see here the each slide has 2 because it's a huge table, and if I put the whole table in one slide, you wouldn't be able to read it. So I put it across 3 slides. So you can see here we are talking about, and under each policy set, we grouped what are the things we think could work under that. So I'll just quickly run you through the whole 6 elements. So there's the process of accumulation, slowing that, the process of accumulation that's mainly being led by the global north, then enabling introducing ecological reparations, then transforming the extraction, the mining, the way we do it now and how we can transform that, then the transformation of international trade, how we can do that. There's transformation of international monetary and financial system, and finally the global governance, how we can reprioritize and introduce new elements and prioritization in the global governance to enable this the world, moving towards a more just collective world. Under the first group, the accumulation of global, slowing the process of accumulation in the global north, we are suggesting, so quite a lot of them, of course, comes from already the degrowth movement proposes these, and there are other that are also, if not degrowth, but definitely post-growth or moving away from the whole growth centrist paradigm. So there is like introducing social limits. I can. Is someone saying something?
I guess this was not on purpose.
Okay. Thank you. So there is the societal limits, caps on resource use, contraction and convergence. So basically, like, yeah, this is self-imposed caps, and then there is element of stopping the harm, so phasing out fossil fuels and moratoria, new colonial green extractivism, protection of indigenous land rights. These are some elements. And then the second group, debt cancellation, unconditional cash transfer, weighed by accumulated disadvantages, funding climate adaptation, loss and damage, technology transfer, knowledge commons. And then the other element is cleaning up the ecological mess, rewilding, drawing down carbon, and land reform. Under the third and fourth, when we talk about extraction, we mean that how we can reimagine the mining process, and that means introducing strong local ownership and democratic say in the process. In the supply chain, we introduce more focus on how we can introduce supply chain justice and how we can think about just the whole way we make decisions about collecting resources. For international trade, revising the terms of trade, introducing price stabilization, enforcing stronger supply chain justice, preferential trade agreement, just transition in South. Delinking is also will be a big part of this. Limiting energy intensive trade, transforming shipping and aviation, globally just delinking, deglobalization. And for the monetary and financial systems, we thought of what the group of policies that could be the bankers, one example, democratically managing this I don't know, but SDRs and tax justice, ending tax havens, introducing global social ecological taxes. And reprioritization in global governance. We have the global democratic institutions where we were then, of course, belief centering on rights of nature, open localized, freeing up mobility of people across borders, safe passages for relocation, prioritizing indigenous rights, and decolonizing conservation efforts. And now we can take some questions and comments, I think, Nadine. Otherwise, I just have a summary slide, like what would be our decolonial economy, and then some reflection points, questions for bigger group discussion. How should we proceed?
Thank you, Tonny. Maybe let's have a look at the summary slide to sort of start to digest, and then we take 1 or 2 minutes to make up questions.
Yeah.
So we have a look at the summary and then take 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm not introducing the summary anymore. It's just to kind of capture what could be our starting points. And I think it's a lot is already happening in different ways through different initiatives and collective efforts. But of course, if you remember what we are up against, if the resources and the wealth, it's very centered, and the one person, the amount they have, and if we are fighting against that, I think sometimes it's good to remember what we are up against, and it's not, it is also intentionally against life. For me, I struggled a really long time to kind of perceive how could someone actively, with all their conscious intelligence and effort, try to be so much against collective well-being or life or effort? But I think I have come into terms that is the case, and if we are, that's what we are fighting against, and to remember the amount of resources and the money and the power that's there, and that means the ability to frame narratives, and a lot of even the process we know as of for change, the government power, and in many cases financial power. So these are the places where we start, but then also then how we can strengthen our collective efforts and build more bridges, and be stronger in our efforts to kind of resist.